The gap nobody warns you about. Most people assume that living longer means living better. Science tells a very different story. Researchers studying global aging data found that the average person now spends roughly 10 years of their life in a state of poor health before they die, a decade marked by chronic disease, cognitive decline, physical limitation, and dependency. This gap between how long you live and how long you live well is called the Healthspan deficit, and it is one of the most important and least discussed concepts in modern medicine. The World Health Organization confirmed that while global life expectancy has increased dramatically over the past century, healthspan has not kept pace, meaning millions of people are living longer, but spending a growing portion of those extra years suffering rather than thriving. The real danger for anyone over 55 is that this gap does not appear suddenly. It builds silently through decades of biological processes that are already underway long before the first obvious symptom ever appears. Inflammation steals your years. Of all the biological mechanisms driving the health span gap, chronic low-grade inflammation is the most consistently identified culprit across decades of research. Scientists call this process inflammaging, and it describes a state where the immune system remains in a permanent low-level alarm state that slowly destroys healthy tissue throughout the body. Research published in Nature Medicine found that inflammaging is directly linked to virtually every major age-related disease, including heart disease, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer, and arthritis. But here is the problem. Inflammaging produces no obvious symptoms in its early stages. There is no pain, no fever, no clear signal that your immune system is silently attacking your own tissue year after year. The real danger is that by the time inflammaging produces a diagnosable condition, it has typically been active for a decade or more, consuming healthy years of life that can never be recovered. Muscle loss compresses your life. One of the most direct and measurable drivers of the health span gap is the accelerating loss of muscle mass and quality that begins after 50 and intensifies with each passing decade. Sarcopenia, the medical term for age-related muscle loss, affects an estimated 50% of adults over 80 and begins its silent progression as early as the mid-40s. But here is what most people never connect. Muscle is not just about strength or appearance. It is the body's primary metabolic organ, responsible for glucose regulation, immune support, hormonal balance, and physical independence. Research published in the Journal of Cachexia, Sarcopenia, and Muscle found that low muscle mass is one of the strongest predictors of early entry into a state of frailty, the clinical conditions that most directly compresses health span by creating dependency, increasing fall risk, and dramatically raising vulnerability to illness. The real danger is that muscle loss feels gradual until suddenly it does not. Your mitochondria are failing. Inside every cell in your body, tiny structures called mitochondria are generating the energy that keeps your organs functioning, your brain thinking, and your muscles contracting. After 55, mitochondrial function declines at an accelerating rate, producing less energy while simultaneously generating more toxic byproducts called free radicals that damage surrounding cellular structures. Research published in Cell Metabolism found that mitochondrial dysfunction is now considered one of the primary hallmarks of biological aging, directly linked to fatigue, cognitive decline, cardiovascular deterioration, and metabolic disease. This is where it gets worse. Mitochondrial decline creates a vicious cycle. Less energy means less physical activity. Less physical activity accelerates mitochondrial deterioration further. Scientists have found that this downward spiral, once established, progresses significantly faster in sedentary adults over 55, compressing the period of healthy functional life into an increasingly narrow window. Your brain declines before you notice. Cognitive decline is one of the most feared and least understood contributors to the health span gap, and the research reveals a timeline that most people find deeply uncomfortable. Studies using advanced brain imaging have shown that structural changes associated with cognitive decline begin appearing in the brain as early as the mid-50s, decades before any clinical diagnosis would be made. The real danger is what researchers call the preclinical window, the period during which significant neurological damage is accumulating while the person experiencing it still functions apparently normally. Research from the Alzheimer's Association found that amyloid plaques, the toxic protein deposits linked to Alzheimer's disease, can begin accumulating 15 to 20 years before symptoms emerge. For adults currently in their mid-50s, this means the biological processes determining their cognitive health span in their 70s are already in motion right now, making the next decade one of the most critical intervention windows available. The lifestyle fix science proved. Here is what makes the health span deficit genuinely different from most medical problems. Researchers studying blue zone populations and centenarian cohorts have identified a cluster of lifestyle factors that consistently predict a dramatically narrower gap between lifespan and health span. A landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that adults who maintained 4 basic behaviors, not smoking, exercising regularly, eating a plant-rich diet, and keeping weight within a healthy range, reduced their risk of chronic disease by a staggering 80%. This is where the science becomes urgent rather than discouraging. The 10-year health span deficit that most people accept as inevitable is not biologically fixed. It is largely the result of accumulated lifestyle choices that compound over decades, and research consistently shows that meaningful intervention, even in the late 50s and early 60s, can significantly extend the number of healthy, functional, independent years a person lives before chronic disease begins to dominate their daily experience.